to Recovery TV, the voice of hope, with your host, John J. Tassoni Jr. Discussions and information on addiction and mental health issues. Now, here's John and today's guest.
Welcome to Recovery TV, and I'm your host, John Tassoni. The numbers are getting worse. The situation is in dire straits. Today, we'll be talking to Todd Whitridge from Recovery Centers of America. And Todd will be bringing his perspective to Recovery TV. So with that, Todd, welcome, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, John. I appreciate you having me
So
here
tell
today.
me about Recovery Centers.
Recovery Centers of America, we have two facilities in New England. Both are located in Massachusetts. We have Danvers, which has about 200 beds. Westminster has about 100. So combined, we have about 300 beds in Massachusetts serving all of New England. We offer all levels of care for substance use disorders, so inpatient, detox, residential, as well as outpatient levels of care.
What about insurances, Todd? What insurance?
We're in network with most major insurance providers, and we are able to take, right now we're able to take one of the Massachusetts Medicaid plans, and hopefully we'll be expanding our Medicaid offerings at some point.
But
it's
like
a challenge.
Blue Cross, United, Optum.
We're in, Blue Cross, Aetna, Cigna, United, Tufts, not United, sorry, Tufts, Harvard Pilgrim will be on July 1st. We're working with Optum on United and always all of the Optum plans. Hopefully we'll get there sooner rather than later.
So I know the landscape in Rhode Island is in dire straits right now. What about Massachusetts?
I mean, it's a challenge. Everyone's facing a challenge. You know, we all face bed availability issues. We face the challenges of the Medicaid rates. You know, I know Rhode Island has a challenge with that. Yeah. I know Rhode Island also has just not just a bed availability, but it's just beds, period. There aren't a lot of beds in the state of Rhode Island. Right. And, you know, I mean, we're always everyone's always trying to challenge, you know, to tackle the big challenge, which is barriers to access to care, you know, both institutional barriers, things like insurance and other things, but also just the psychological barriers, stigma and things of that nature. And, you know, the way I came into this space is kind of how I inform most of my discussions. And a lot of that is, you know, I had this long professional career prior to getting sober. And, you know, it was just that fear and that stigma around getting better. Because when you're in that world, you don't view it that way. Yeah. And, you know, I went to Recovery Centers of America. I'm an alumni of our Danvers facility. I was there 6 years ago as of May 12th. That's my 6-year sobriety date.
Yeah, congratulations.
Thank you. So yeah, it's been an interesting journey.
So from your perspective, from being in recovery, now you're working in that space, what do you see as far as things we should be doing, things we shouldn't be doing, and things we're doing well?
Yeah, I mean, I think the things we're doing well is, I mean, you can't really improve much more on the inpatient portion of treatment. Like we've kind of figured that part out. I think where the challenges that we face are because inpatient really just gets the person stabilized. I mean, we've become really good at treating just the first part, the acute part of substance use disorder, the clinical part. And the human brain doesn't even start healing until 90 days. So, you know, and a lot of developed nations, the inpatient standard is 90 days. As you know, our 30-day standard isn't even based on science. Right. So we have to utilize within the framework of the health insurance and healthcare system we have to make sure we keep people engaged in their recovery after they leave. And there's so much about that because it's not just treatment. It's job insecurity, food insecurity, the mental health concerns, like everything. You know, I always say this, I say we stabilize the person, we get them back on their feet. And especially with the younger people, which is predominantly opioids, then we send them back out into the world and we just pray, right? Like we pray they're gonna make a healthy decision, that they're gonna show up for their outpatient, or, you know, hopefully we get them into a sober house and hopefully it's a stable sober house. Otherwise we're sending them home oftentimes to an addicted or abusive household. You know, and the deck is so stacked against people once they leave treatment that I think the biggest thing as a community we need to do is put an emphasis on what we're doing after inpatient, as far as support services, job training, ongoing mental health, you know, whatever. Housing is the biggest one, you know, obviously.
Yeah, I know. In Massachusetts, men to women ratio, what is it in Mass?
I think it still sits right around 60-40, 60% male, 40% female, as far as what we see in at the inpatient level of care.
Recovery housing. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, let's talk.
Because I want to get to. I know one of your big programs is first responder programs.
Yeah.
But let's talk a little bit about recovery housing, because, you know, the ones that in Rhode Island that are overseen by BHCDH.
Yeah.
They seem to be running well.
Yeah.
It's the ones that are not overseen by anyone.
Yeah.
We're hearing horror stories about there's more drugs in those houses than there are on the street.
Yeah. I think one of the challenges with recovery residences, in Massachusetts we have the MASH certification. I know you guys have a similar program, and yours has a little bit more teeth in Rhode Island. But you know, ultimately the oversight, and I manage the entire outreach team at RCA for New England, and I tell everyone. And everyone on my team, because we're out in the field, our case managers don't spend a lot of time outside the building.
Right.
I tell everyone on my team, I don't want you recommending a sober house until you've physically been in a recovery residence, until you've physically been in it yourself.
Right, right.
And there's more to that, which is the recovery residence is only as good as the person currently managing it.
Correct.
So a terrific house might be a terrific house, and then the manager moves on, and they fill that role with another house manager. And overnight, that terrific house is no longer terrific. So I agree with you. I think there needs to be a ton of oversight. I think we have a long way to go as far as enacting stricter licensing policies and some sort of governance, so that not just that the houses can be monitored and certified, but also so that grievances are followed up on.
Right.
You know, I mean, it's really hard to get the court of law to care about our population. You know, you call the police and they're like,
yeah, right.
You know, like,
yeah. I'll be there in 20 minutes.
I'll be there in 20 minutes. You know,
and 3 days later,
yeah,
they
exactly.
show up. Right.
And I think a lot of the less ethical recovery residence owners, they know that the law's on their side, so they'll get to it. You know, and you hear the horror stories about locked thermostats and 6 guys to a room, and you know, no drug testing, and as long as the person's paying their rent, they're not going to get kicked out, no matter how egregious the violation is. So it's a challenge. That's another area, and that goes into sort of what we do after treatment. Right. You know, like making sure that that housing stability is there, and they're getting the support they need.
We got to get rid of the bad habits.
Yeah.
In 2 fronts.
Yeah.
The person and the recovery house. We're going to take a quick break. You're watching Recovery TV, and I'm your host, John Tassoni. We'll be right back with Todd after these messages.
Recovery TV with your host, John J. Tassoni Jr. Recovery TV is made possible by our supporting sponsors and our title sponsor, AdCare. Now, here's John and today's guest.
Welcome back to Recovery TV, and I'm your host, John Tassoni. Todd Wittridge is in the house, and Todd is with the Recovery Centers of America. Welcome, Todd, and welcome back, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
And I want to share with my viewers about a program that you have in Massachusetts that's probably, I think, one of a kind. Is that your first responder program?
We actually call it the Rescue Program, and it's our program for first responders. The flagship program was actually founded in our Devon facility in Philadelphia, and we launched it, I think, 4 years ago in Massachusetts at our Westminster facility, and it is an amazing program. So it's an entirely dedicated program for first responders. So anyone that's current or former military, police, fire, corrections officers, they can come to our program and receive specialized care. It's a dedicated unit, so it's segregated from the rest of the population. It's run entirely by people that are former first responders themselves. The guy that runs the program, Tony Jones, is a pretty amazing guy. He's been every kind of first responder you can imagine. He was Air Force, military police, corrections, fire, and at one point an air traffic controller. And he runs it, you know.
Don't even tell me he got fired from every
No. But he's an amazing guy, and it's very specialized programming. It addresses the unique traumas and the unique fears. It helps a lot for them to be in there with people, with peers that are going through the same thing, that have the same fears, the same life experiences, as well as there's some really unique case management needs, especially when it comes to the return to duty process.
Right.
So we've developed a specialty in that. And, you know, I think it's important. We've found it's important. The good news about Westminster is it's kind of in the middle of nowhere. Mm-hmm. It's a beautiful facility. We actually bought the Wachusett Mountain Inn and renovated it. So it kind of feels like you're in a mountain ski lodge inn type place. Very relaxing, very trauma comfortable environment. And a lot of the first responders that go to treatment, they want to be out of their market. And for obvious reasons, they don't necessarily want to be in treatment with someone that they locked up yesterday.
Right.
So we've had an incredibly strong response to that. So strong, in fact, during the sort of post-pandemic era, we saw a large uptick in frontline workers. Right. A lot of nurses, case managers, doctors, a lot of people that work in behavioral health as well, counselors, clinicians. We saw an uptick, a significant uptick. So we basically replicated the rescue model for frontline workers. So the frontline program is also in Westminster, very similar in specialized programming, run by people with lived experience and peers that have been through similar things. Also, very unique case management needs for things like returning to work, especially if it's a nurse or someone that's has to worry about their license, especially related to their substance use.
Right.
So those programs are a terrific success.
I think from what I hear, and I talk to a lot of people around the country, I think we as a country dropped the ball.
Yeah.
On the first responders, nurses, doctors, this pandemic, and everything that coincided with sickness and mental health, and we really dropped the ball. I mean, we sent people home because they didn't get the shots, and now we got a shortage. It's just a perfect storm for first responders right now.
It's a perfect storm for for first responders and frontline workers, in sense that, a disease is an addiction, is a disease of isolation. Addiction is a disease of isolation, and I think I saw this personally in my own recovery community when all the meetings went to Zoom. We took people that were suffering from a disease of isolation, and we sent them to isolation. And we said, good luck, And, people, Zoom meetings were great. I'm not in love with Zoom. I don't love Zoom meetings. I have a daily morning meeting that I go to, and I want to be there in person. That's where that connection for me happens. That's where I get my recovery. And when that went away, I was seeing people with 5, 10, 15 years of sobriety relapsing.
Wow.
Yeah, it was wild to see that. And to have that pressure then added on, I just think of also just the staff in our buildings, They were wearing those masks, not just regular masks, they were the N95 masks that are fitted to your face. They were wearing those in our buildings. The staff I tip my cap to them, because they were doing that for 2 years, before they could switch to surgical masks,
Right.
The stress of that. And so we saw a huge uptick, and that's why we replicated the program for frontline workers.
Do you guys do adolescent treatment too?
We don't, unfortunately. We're 18 plus, and it's interesting that you should bring that up, because that's a huge hole right now, because they're really
big hole.
There isn't any. You've got MYR. You've got MYR in Worcester. Then you've got a handful of programs in Connecticut, but that's it. Like, there's nothing else. And it's a real shame, because you're seeing, especially with the mental health crisis with youth, a lot of those people are turning to substances.
Right.
As we all know, we're all sort of self-medicating for something else.
Well, Rhode Island, the alcohol sales are up 300%.
Yeah, it's crazy.
since COVID.
Yeah.
You know, I have a few in my neighborhood that the guys that tell me before, the people used to come in and buy a 6-pack, now they're buying cases.
Yeah.
Used to buy a couple of nips, and now they're buying 12 packs. And it's just, and it goes on and on and on.
Yeah.
And you know, the other sad part about that is too, there's so much of it out there, and you can't get beds.
Yeah.
In Rhode Island.
Yeah.
You can't get beds.
Nothing.
You know, 7, 8, 10 days.
Yeah.
You know, when somebody wants to go, and they call you up and say, "Listen, I need to go. I just had one before I came on the show."
Yeah.
And I call the facility. Geez, John, he's gonna have to wait till the end of the week. Well, you know what's gonna happen with that young man?
Yeah.
He's not coming around the end of the week.
Yeah. Yeah, that window of willingness closes really quickly.
Yeah.
You know? And you've got, it's interesting you talk about the alcohol sales increase. I don't think we don't do enough talking about alcohol because it's, I think because of because of the opiate crisis, you know, that gets the attention and the justly gets its attention because it's just been a terrible epidemic in the opiate crisis. But alcohol is still killing a lot more people.
Yeah.
You know, it kills
people don't realize it.
140,000 people a year killed with alcohol-related deaths, and we don't talk about it. And you know, it's interesting you bring up the pandemic with the increase in drinking. My phone, you know, I think everyone that gets sober, we all have a similar experience. You get sober, and then your phone starts ringing with friends from your life. They're like, "Hey, I heard you got sober. What's that like?" You know, and you know what they're really calling about. Those phone calls skyrocketed in 8 months to a year into COVID, because my friends, my peers, in my old professional career life, who were high functioning, you know, alcohol dependent people, they were on Zoom at home. They weren't going into their fancy offices anymore. And that 4 o'clock drink, office happy hour, became noon, and then it became 11. You know, and
we're gonna take a quick break. You've been watching Recovery TV, and I'm your host, John Tassoni, here with Todd. And Todd is from Recovery Centers of America. We'll be right back after these messages.
Back to Recovery TV with your host, John J. Tassoni Jr. Recovery TV is made possible by our supporting sponsors and our title sponsor, AdCare. Now, here's John and today's guest.
Welcome back to Recovery TV, and I'm your host, John Tassoni. Todd Wittridge is in the house. He's with the Recovery Centers of America. Todd, welcome, and thank you again for joining us today. I wish you the best in your recovery. Why don't you give us your phone number?
Yeah, I mean, if anyone is struggling or looking for resources or just wants to talk, you can always just call me directly or shoot me a text. My number is 617-899-0913. It's my personal cell phone. I answer that phone unless I'm asleep.
Asleep? You sleep?
Sometimes. I try, occasionally.
So quickly, Recovery Centers of America, they're all over the country, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
And you're opening up a couple new ones?
Opening up soon in South Carolina. We just opened Indianapolis and Chicago over the last year. So we've got pretty much coverage from Mid-Atlantic to the Midwest, and growing, hopefully. Yeah.
You know, I have to give your organization a lot of credit. You know, to expand at a time where we have an epidemic, obviously. Mm-hmm. It doesn't look like it's going to go away anytime soon. Yeah. I was hearing something on the radio today, some new stuff coming into the country. But again, thank you for coming in. I greatly appreciate you and your organization coming in to Rhode Island and helping out the people in need. So again, thank you. Take the message back.
I appreciate it, John.
I really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you very much.
You've been watching Recovery TV, and I'm your host, John Tassoni. We'll see you next week.